Your basement isn't just a basement anymore. Not this year. Your father has started measuring it with a tape measure and a pencil stub, marking the corner near the coal chute. Your mother is counting cans in the pantry. Nobody has said the word out loud yet, but you already know what this is. It's 1961, and your basement has become a calculation. How many cans of food? How many gallons of water? How many days you could survive down there? Sealed off, waiting for the sky to stop being dangerous. 14 days is the number the government keeps repeating. 2 weeks until the radiation outside drops low enough to breathe. Your family is trying to solve for that number with concrete blocks and canned peaches. This wasn't a fringe idea. Historian Kenneth Rose, who spent years studying this exact period, found that fallout shelter construction became something close to a national obsession by the early 1960s. Hardware stores sold shelter kits next to lawnmowers. Life magazine ran a 12-page feature in 1961 showing families how to convert a corner of their basement into a survivable bunker. The government's own pamphlet, The Family Fallout Shelter, walked parents through it step by step, like a recipe. 2 feet of packed earth, concrete block walls, a blast door. If you could afford one. This was also the era of Operation Alert, a series of nationwide civil defense drills the government ran throughout the 1950s. Sirens sounded in cities across the country. Traffic stopped. Office workers filed into basements and subway tunnels, pretending, for a few staged minutes, that a warhead was already in the air. The drills were meant to normalize the unthinkable, to make the walk to a shelter feel as routine as a fire drill. But normalizing something and making peace with it are not the same thing. Your parents could walk through the motions calmly and still lie awake afterward doing the real math in their heads. And the real math was brutal. A family of 4 needed roughly 2 weeks of food and water stored, plus a battery radio, a chemical toilet, and enough packed earth or concrete overhead to block gamma radiation. Added up, and a modest shelter could cost several $100s. Real money in 1961, sometimes a month or more of a father's wages. Not every family could afford that. And that gap, between the families who could build and the families who couldn't, is where the real question started. But here's what the pamphlets didn't put in bold print. If your shelter worked, and your neighbors didn't, what happens when they knock on your door? This is the question that turned a construction project into a moral one. And it wasn't hypothetical. In 1961, a Jesuit priest named L.C. McHugh published an essay in the Catholic magazine, America, called Ethics at the Shelter Doorway. He asked, in plain terms, whether a family sealed inside a shelter had the right to keep a neighbor out, whether they had the right to use force to do it. The essay didn't stay in theology circles. It got picked up by newspapers across the country, and suddenly it was a dinner table argument in half of suburban America. Picture it from inside your own house. Your father bolts the shelter door shut from the inside. Through 6 inches of concrete, you can still hear someone outside. Maybe it's the Hendersons from 2 doors down, the ones who joked about shelters instead of building one. Do you let them in? Every extra body inside means less air, less water, less food stretched over 14 days. Do you decide who lives based on who prepared? Some families answered it before anyone even asked. In towns across the country, quiet agreements formed between neighbors. Informal, unwritten, never quite said in full sentences. If the sirens go off, you come to us. If our shelter fills up, you don't. Other families answered it by saying nothing at all, hoping the question would simply never arrive at their door. And some families, according to Rose's research, went further than agreements. They kept a shotgun near the shelter entrance, not to use on an enemy, to use on a neighbor. Try sitting with that for a second. The weapon in the house wasn't there for the Soviets. It was there for the Hendersons, a tool bought to guard against a foreign enemy, repurposed, quietly, to guard against the family next door. Nobody wanted to answer that question in April. Everybody had to answer it by October. Because in October of 1962, the hypothetical stopped being hypothetical. The Cuban Missile Crisis put American cities inside range of Soviet missiles with a flight time of minutes, not hours. For 13 days, the calculation your family had been running as a kind of grim hobby became, in your parents' minds, something they might actually have to use. Picture your street during those 13 days. Grocery store shelves stripped of canned goods and bottled water within hours. Gas stations with lines wrapping the block. Your mother filling every container in the house with tap water, even the bathtub, just in case. Your father checking the basement door twice before bed, testing the latch like it might have loosened overnight. You weren't told exactly what was happening, but you understood, the way children always understand. that the adults were frightened in a way you hadn't seen before. Psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton, who studied the psychological toll of nuclear-age living, described a phenomenon he called psychic numbing, the way people quietly shut down their emotional response to a threat too large to process every day. You couldn't walk around terrified for 17 years straight, so the dread got folded into routine, into cans on a shelf, into a tape measure in the corner of the basement. And here's the part that should surprise you. Most families who built shelters never used them, and most who didn't build them never needed to. The crisis passed, the missiles were withdrawn, life went back to normal, or something that looked like normal from the outside. But the basement stayed. The cans stayed on the shelf for years, quietly expiring, a monument to a math problem nobody wanted to solve and nobody wanted to admit they'd tried. Historian Paul Boyer, who traced how deeply nuclear fear had woven itself into American culture, noted that this wasn't just a government messaging campaign working as intended. It was something closer to a slow-motion trauma that families absorbed and then quietly filed away, unresolved. The shelter didn't disappear when the crisis ended, it just stopped being urgent. It became the thing in the basement nobody wanted to talk about at parties. Half joke, half confession. Kenneth Rose's research found something else. 2. Something almost darker than the fear itself. Surveys from the period showed that a significant number of Americans admitted, when asked directly, that they would consider using a weapon to keep a neighbor out of a shelter that couldn't hold everyone, not because they were cruel, because the number of cans only stretched so far, and the government's own pamphlets never told you what to do when the math ran out. So why does this matter now, sitting where you are? Because you've done a version of this math too, maybe not with concrete and canned goods, but you've made your own quiet calculations about how much you can share before there isn't enough left for you, how much room you have for other people's emergencies before your own runs out. Think about the last time your resources felt limited, a tight month of money, a stretched afternoon with too many people needing your time. Somewhere in the back of your mind, a version of that same door swung shut, at least a little. At least for a moment. You didn't need a shotgun to do it. You just needed to decide, quietly, who gets let in. The basement shelter was an extreme version of a very ordinary problem. What do you owe the people around you? When resources are limited and fear is high, your grandparents solved it with plywood and prayer, and a debate that spilled out of a Catholic magazine and onto kitchen tables across the country. You solve a smaller version of it every single week, usually without noticing, usually without anyone knocking on an actual door. The Cold War generation didn't invent this dilemma. They just built it out of concrete blocks and canned peaches, so plainly that you could see its exact shape, measured in gallons of water and days of food, sitting right there in the corner of the basement. Your basement isn't just a basement anymore. It never really was.